Welcome to the mini book podcast, Proof of Christ edition.
It's great to be here.
Today we are tackling an absolute giant of a book. It's called The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright. And when I say giant, I'm not just talking at the page count, though it is. It's massive. It's practically a doorstop.
It really is.
I mean, this is arguably the most comprehensive historical investigation into the resurrection of Jesus ever written. N.T. Wright isn't just a theologian. He's a top-tier New Testament scholar, a historian.
That's right. And he treats the text with, just rigorous academic discipline. He's doing something really unique here.
What's that?
He's essentially taking the resurrection out of the realm of, say, abstract theology or just wishful thinking, and he's putting it under the microscope of history.
Okay.
So he's not asking, what does this mean to you in your heart? He's asking, what actually happened, on the ground in the first century? And maybe more importantly, why did the early Christians believe what they believed?
Before we get into all that, we just want to thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing for future content.
Yeah, that would be great.
And a quick disclaimer, while the voices you're hearing are AI, the content comes straight from N.T. Wright's book. We really feel this is a great way to learn why Jesus Christ is God. But of course, after hearing this, we would really encourage you to go out and purchase this book and support the author. It's a massive volume, and we can only, scratch the surface here.
Oh, absolutely. It's worth the investment for anyone serious about history or faith.
So let's set the stage. Our goal with this discussion is pretty specific. We're not just, telling the Easter story for the sake of it.
Right.
We're exploring how the historical evidence for the resurrection functions as the ultimate proof that Jesus Christ is God.
And to do that, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room.
The skepticism.
Exactly. We live in a modern skeptical world. We tend to look at miracles and a resurrection specifically as, myths, maybe metaphors, or just ancient superstition. Yeah. But Wright's argument is that history itself, the actual tangible existence of the Christian church and its really peculiar beliefs, it just doesn't make sense unless the resurrection actually happened.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think a lot of us think we know what resurrection means, but Wright spends a huge chunk of the book telling us we've probably got it wrong.
That's the first major hurdle, yeah.
I mean, when I hear resurrection, I usually think life after death. You die, your soul goes to heaven, you're with the angels. Is that not it?
See, that's the first misconception Wright corrects, and it's a big one. In the ancient world, resurrection did not mean life after death.
It didn't.
No. It didn't mean the soul escaping the body to go to a better place. I mean, most ancient cultures believed in some form of life after death, ghosts, shades, spirits, the underworld, but that wasn't resurrection.
So if it's not just the soul floating away to some cloudy paradise, what is the specific definition we're working with?
Wright uses a very specific phrase for it. He says resurrection is life after death.
Life after death. Okay, that's a bit of a tongue twister. Break that down for us.
Think of it as a two-stage process.
Sure.
Stage one, you die and you go into some kind of temporary state. That's life after death.
Yeah.
Your soul is separated from your body.
Okay, got it.
But stage two, that's the kicker. Stage two is when you return to a body. It's a reversal of death. It's a return to bodily life, but a transformed bodily life.
A new kind of body.
A new kind of body. And here's where it gets fascinating. In the ancient world, pretty much nobody believed this would actually happen to anyone.
Nobody. I feel like I've read about Greek gods bringing people back.
Not really in this way.
Yeah.
Let's look at the spectrum of belief.
Yeah.
You had the pagans, Homer, Plato, that whole intellectual tradition.
Right.
Their view is pretty clear. Dead people stay dead. In fact, for a lot of Greek philosophers, the body was a prison for the soul. The whole point of death was to escape the meat suit, to get free.
So if you thought the body was a trap, coming back to it would be a punishment, not a reward.
Exactly. Resurrection, coming back into a body, wasn't considered impossible. It was undesirable. They called it the hope of worms. Why would you want to go back to the thing that gets sick and decays?
Okay, so the pagan world is completely out on this idea.
Right.
What about the Jewish context? Jesus was Jewish. His disciples were Jewish. Surely they had a different view.
They did, but it was complicated. The Jewish view was divided. On one side, you had the Sadducees, the ruling elite, the temple authorities. They were strict materialists in a way. No future life, no resurrection, dust to dust. When you're dead, you're done.
Pretty bleak. But not everyone thought that, right?
No. You had the Pharisees. Now, they did believe in resurrection, but And this is the critical distinction. They believed it would happen to everyone, all of God's people, all at once,
At the very end of time.
at the very end of history. It was the grand finale of the cosmos, the day when God fixes the whole world.
So the idea of one person being resurrected right in the middle of history while everything else just keeps going on?
Was a completely foreign concept. It was a mutation. Wright actually calls it the Christian mutation.
Huh.
The early Christians were claiming something that didn't fit the pagan worldview or the Jewish worldview. They were saying resurrection happened to one single individual, Jesus, while history was still going, while Caesar was still on the throne.
And Wright's point is that you don't just invent an idea that defies all your cultural categories unless something really compels you to.
Precisely. If they were just making it up, they would have stuck to the script. This wasn't some generic religious experience where they just felt Jesus' presence.
Right.
They used a very specific word, anastasis, which meant bodily return. If they just wanted to say Jesus was with God, they had plenty of other language for that. They could have said he was exalted or became an angel or was a spirit, but they didn't. They dug their heels in and said he was raised.
This leads us into what I think is one of the most compelling parts of the book. Wright talks about this puzzle of the failed Messiah because, let's be honest, by first century standards, looking at it objectively, Jesus looked like a failure.
It sounds harsh because we know the end of the story, but historically, yes. You have to look at what a Messiah was expected to actually do.
It was a job description.
Totally. With clear KPIs. You had to defeat Israel's enemies, which meant kicking out the Romans, and you had to rebuild or cleanse the temple.
And Jesus did neither of those things. In fact, the Romans.
The Romans executed him.
Right.
And historically speaking, if your Messiah is killed by the enemy, he is not the Messiah. He is a failed revolutionary.
And there were others, right.
Many others. Where it points out there were lots of would-be messiahs before and after Jesus. Judas the Galilean, Simon Bar Kokhba. These guys had armies, movements, they minted coins.
And what happened when those guys were killed? Did their followers run around saying they were resurrected?
No. And that's the find a new one rule Wright talks about. When a messianic leader was killed, the followers had two choices. One, give up, go home, try not to get killed yourself.
The smart option.
Usually, yeah. Or two, find a new messiah, usually relative of the dead leader, to carry on the cause.
So, in Jesus's case, following that pattern, they should have either disbanded or picked his brother,
Yeah.
James.
Exactly. James, the brother of Jesus, was a huge leader in the early church. He was right there. He was respected. By all rights, they should have said, okay, Jesus is dead, but James is the new Messiah. Let's keep fighting.
But they didn't.
But, and this is the historical anomaly, nobody ever called James the Messiah. They stuck with the guy who was crucified.
Which seems strategically insane.
It is absurd, unless something happened to change the definition of failure. They didn't go home. They didn't pick a replacement. They insisted Jesus was the Messiah.
And the only reason for that would be...
If they believed he had been vindicated by God. And vindicated how? Through resurrection. In the Jewish worldview, the crucifixion was a verdict. Deuteronomy said, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree.
So the cross was proof God rejected him.
It was. But the resurrection was God reversing that verdict. It was God saying, no, the Roman court was wrong. The Jewish council was wrong. This is my son. And this is really step one of the proof we're talking about. The resurrection proved God was on Jesus' side.
Okay, so let's talk about the nature of this event, because if I'm a skeptic, I'm thinking, okay, maybe they were grieving, maybe they hallucinated, maybe they saw a ghost and just called it resurrection.
And Wright tackles that head on.
Yeah.
He asks, what kind of body did the risen Jesus have? And if you look at the accounts, the answer is just incredibly strange.
It's weird.
It's very weird. It doesn't fit the category of a ghost, but it also doesn't fit the category of a simple resuscitation, like Lazarus just coming back to life only to die again later.
Right. Uses a specific term for this, right? It sounds a bit like something from a physics textbook.
He does. He calls it transphysicality.
Transphysicality. That sounds like a sci-fi term. What are we actually talking about here?
It means transform physicality. When you look at the gospel narratives, the stories are weirdly consistent about this inconsistency. On one hand, Jesus is solid. He can be touched. He tells Thomas to touch his wounds. He eats broiled fish. He isn't a phantom.
He has mass.
He has mass. But on the other hand, he's doing things normal bodies can't do.
He appears inside locked rooms.
Exactly. He vanishes. And interestingly, he's often not immediately recognized. Mary Magdalene thinks he's the gardener. The disciples on the road to Emmaus walk and talk with him for hours without realizing who he is.
It's like he's physical, but not bound by physics as we know it.
Perfect way to put it. And why does this matter for the argument? Why is this weird transphysical description evidence against hallucination?
Because you hallucinate what you expect to see.
Exactly. Hallucinations are projections of what is already in your mind. If the disciples were just projecting their grief, they would have seen what their culture trained them to see. A ghost, a spirit, maybe a shining star. They wouldn't hallucinate a body that can eat fish but also walk through walls?
Because they didn't have a category for that yet. You can't hallucinate something you can't even imagine.
You don't hallucinate something unprecedented. And if they were making it up lying, they would have made it easier to believe. They would have said, he is a shining angel now.
Yeah.
They wouldn't invent this transphysical body because it was too confusing.
So the only reason they described him this way.
Right. Jordy argues it's because that is actually what happened. They were struggling to describe a new reality they didn't have words for yet.
And this brings us to the two pillars Wright talks about all the time. The empty tomb and the appearances.
Yes, you need both. If you have an empty tomb but no appearances, people just assume grave robbery. They say, someone stole the body.
Which was actually the first rumor that went around, wasn't it?
It was. And if you have appearances but the body is still in the tomb,
then you say, we're seeing his ghost, or it's a vision. You just go to the tomb, point at the body, and say, calm down, he's right there.
right? You cannot have the early Christian claim of bodily resurrection without both the tomb being empty and the disciples having these weird transphysical encounters. The combination is what locked in this new belief.
Okay, so something historical happened to cause this belief. The tomb was empty, they saw him, it wasn't a ghost. But let's bridge the gap. How do we get from Jesus is alive to Jesus is God?
That's the crucial question.
Because that's a big jump. I mean,
Yeah.
Lazarus was raised, but no one thinks Lazarus is God.
It is a huge jump, and it ties back to that title, Messiah, or Son of God. Originally in the Old Testament, Son of God was a title for the king. It didn't mean you were divine in the ontological sense, like made of the same stuff as God.
Right, it meant you were God's chosen ruler, his representative on earth, like King David.
But because of the resurrection, the early Christians began to realize that Jesus wasn't just a human king. The resurrection vindicated Jesus' own radical claims about himself. And this is where we get into the political danger.
You mean with Rome?
Yes. The early Christians started calling Jesus Kyrios, Lord. Now, in the first century, Kyrios wasn't just a religious word you said in church. It was a political title.
Reserved for Caesar.
Reserved for Caesar. Caesar was Lord. Caesar was the Son of God. That was on the coins.
So calling Jesus Lord wasn't just a prayer, it was basically treason.
It was high treason. It was saying Jesus is the true ruler of the world and Caesar is just a cheap parody. But it goes even deeper than politics. Wright shows how the early Christians took Old Testament texts that were specifically about YHWH, the one true God of Israel, and applied them directly to Jesus.
Can you give us a concrete example of that?
The classic one is Philippians 2, where Paul says, "At the name of Jesus, every knee should bow."
Okay.
That is a direct quote from Isaiah 45, where God says, "To me, every knee shall bow." Paul is taking a text about the one God strict monotheism and wrapping it around Jesus.
That is huge. He's effectively saying Jesus is included in the very identity of God.
It's monumental. And the logic is, if God raised Jesus, and Jesus is Lord of the world, and there is only one God, then Jesus has to be identified with the one God. The resurrection was the stamp of approval on Jesus' divinity. It was the proof.
If he had stayed dead, his claims to be one with the Father would have died with him.
Exactly. Since he rose, those claims are validated by God himself. The resurrection isn't just a happy ending. It's the event that redefines who God is.
Okay, but surely people have tried to explain this away differently. What about that idea of cognitive dissonance? You hear this a lot, that the disciples were so traumatized, so desperate, that they just convinced themselves he was alive to cope.
Wright rejects this pretty thoroughly.
Mm-mm.
And his reasoning is sharp. Cognitive dissonance, rationalizing a failure, it leads to spiritualizing.
What do you mean by spiritualizing?
Well, if your leader dies, you might say, his work continues through us,
Right.
or he's with us in spirit. That allows you to keep the movement going without denying the reality of his death. It leads to a spiritual movement. It does not lead to the claim that the tomb is physically empty and he's walking around eating fish.
Right, you don't rationalize a failure by making a claim that is so easily falsifiable that sets you up for even more failure if someone just produces the body.
Exactly. And this leads to Wright's famous arch analogy. Picture a stone archway. He says the pillars of the arch are the empty tomb and the appearances.
Okay, two pillars standing up, gap in the middle.
The arch, the keystone that fits perfectly on top, connecting them and holding them together, is the historical fact of the bodily resurrection.
And if you take that keystone away?
The pillars fall down.
Hmm.
Because just the empty tomb is grave robbery. Just appearances or hallucinations. Any other theory fails to fit both pillars. The only thing that fits the shape of the historical evidence is the resurrection itself.
And there's one more detail you mentioned, the surprise factor in the stories themselves.
Yes. This is subtle, but so important for historians. If you read the resurrection stories in the Gospels, they feel breathless, confused. They don't look like polished theology.
They look like raw footage.
That's a great way to put it. They describe women running, disciples doubting, people being afraid. Later, Paul writes polished theology explaining why Jesus died and rose. But the Gospel accounts just say, the stone was moved, he wasn't there, we were terrified, then we saw him.
So that lack of polish suggests they're early reports, not later inventions.
It suggests they're recounting the shock of the event before they'd even fully processed the theology.
It's incredible when you stack it all up. You have the cultural impossibility of the claim, the puzzle of the failed Messiah, the weird transphysical body nobody could have invented, and the sheer boldness of calling a crucified man God.
It's a cumulative case. Wright isn't saying he can prove it like a math equation. History doesn't work that way. But he is saying that the historian's forced to ask, what is the best explanation for all of this? Why did this group of Jewish peasants suddenly start a movement that conquered the Roman Empire?
Centered on a dead man they claimed was the Lord of the universe.
And the answer, according to Wright, is that he wasn't just a dead man. The answer is that he rose. And because he rose, we know he is who he said he was. We know that Jesus Christ is God.
This has been a fascinating journey through this. It really changes how you read the New Testament when you understand the context. It's not just stories, it's evidence.
It really is. It grounds faith, in fact. It turns the resurrection from a nice idea into a concrete historical event that demands a response.
Well, we are just about out of time. But to recap, we've seen that the historical fact of the resurrection is the bedrock proof. It explains the empty tomb, why the disciples became bold, and why they worshipped a crucified man as the creator God.
And it challenges us today. If this is true, if this actually happened, then it changes everything. It means the world isn't just a random collection of atoms. It's a place where God is actively working to renew everything.
We want to thank you again for subscribing and listening to this Proof of Christ edition of the podcast. If you enjoyed this, please tell others about it. We really want to get this content out there.
And please do go out and buy N.T. Wright's book, The Resurrection of the Son of God.
Yeah.
Support the author. It is a dense read, but so rewarding.
And we want to hear from you. In the comments section, please suggest other books you'd like to hear us cover in future episodes.
Definitely. We look forward to your suggestions.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Wright mentions that the resurrection wasn't just a miracle for Jesus, it was the start of a new creation. If the resurrection is the launch of a new world where death is defeated, what does that mean for how we live right now? Are we living as citizens of that new world, or are we still stuck in the old one? Something to think about. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.